Good morning, everyone. We'll wait till 10 o'clock. Okay. Mohan sir also is here. So we'll wait till 10 o'clock.
Good morning, sir.
Good morning.
Sir, I made this live on YouTube.
Okay. So,
And we have more than 4 or 5 people watching it on YouTube also right now.
have you made me co-host?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. I made you co-host.
Shall we start?
Yes, sir. It's just 3 more minutes, sir. I said 10 o'clock.
Okay.
So once your lecture starts, I will switch off my video, sir, so that only your video is present.
Okay.
Sir, we'll start, sir.
Good morning, everybody. It's nice to be back in Hyderabad virtually. I think I remember we did a workshop for this batch on basic design. The same batch, no?
Yes,
Okay.
sir. Yes, sir.
Okay, so today I'll be explaining about energy efficient landscaping for microclimate modification. So there are some words in this title. All of you are aware what is energy efficiency, reduction of energy, landscaping you are aware, and microclimate. There are three When we talk about climate, we talk about three types of climate. One is macroclimate, one is mesoclimate, and one is microclimate. The difference between micro and macro is macroclimate cannot be controlled by man. For example, global warming and all these things, their efforts are being made, but it's not so easy to control them. Now, microclimate could be the climate of a particular room, or it could be the climate of a street or a small neighborhood. And many times it is within the purview of architect to control this microclimate. And sometimes the microclimate may be unfavorable. It might be too windy. For example, suppose you take a tall building. At the base of this tall building, the wind speeds are quite high. And if you have an outdoor cafe there, then people will feel very uncomfortable. Or when pedestrians are walking, when they turn a corner, then they may just, there could be a strong gust of wind which might topple them. So what happens is this adverse type of microclimate needs to be modified. It has to be modified and brought within the levels of favorable microclimate. So how landscaping can help in this? This is what we are going to discuss. Now, first of all, what is landscape design? See, every site is having certain features. It might be a sloping site, it might be hollow site, or it might be a flat site, and it has its own requirements. On one side, you have requirements of the site, and on the other side, you have the requirements of the client. That functional program that will dictate the requirements of the client. So how well you compromise with the requirements of the client and the requirements of the site, that compromise basically you can say is landscape design. And it is the creation of evocative. What is the meaning of evocative? Evocative means something that brings to your mind certain meanings, certain feelings. Like you look at something, it might remind you of a particular culture or scene that you had seen earlier. For example, you might visit a Japanese garden, and that might evoke certain memories. So similarly, other types of gardens. So these memories can be positive or negative also. So basically, evocative means to create some memories. Then meaningful. So it has to have some meaning. And sustainable. Sustainable, it should be able to continue with that landscape. It should be easy to maintain. And, people themselves should be able to maintain the landscape. And even in times of water crisis, the landscape should continue to function. So there are terms like xeriscape, which talks about energy efficient water efficiency. So it is a conscious process. See, the conscious process means you are putting some thought into that, and then you are managing, planning, and physically changing or modifying the landscape. Many times you cannot design on the building in the site just as the site is. You may have to make some changes. For example, there could be a big drain in the middle of the site. So building on that site is very, very difficult. So you may have to, change the course, alter the, push the drain to the side of the site or something like that, because it may not be possible to build in the middle of the site. So you might make certain modifications. Then the design landscape is the totality that evolves over time in response to a wide-ranging diverse influences. There are a lot of influences which help in shaping the particular design landscape. It could be the culture, it could be the climate, it could be materials which are available, and all these things will dictate how the landscape evolves over time. These formative influences might impart order and give form and meaning for the landscape. See, one of the basic jobs in an architect is to create order out of chaos. Say, suppose you enter into a room and all the furniture in the room and is all arranged in a haphazard manner. Books are thrown on the floor, clothes are lying on the floor, and you can see like a room may be a big mess. Now, what is the job of the architect? He'll rearrange all the things and then he'll try to bring order out of this chaotic situation in the room. Similarly, the same situation can occur outside the room. Say, let it be a neighborhood or it could be a street or the built environment. Things might be arranged in a very haphazard manner. So, how to bring order out of this chaos? That is one of the jobs that the architect strives to do. The character of the built landscape, the form, materials, scale, texture, and spirit are responses to these form-giving influences. So all these things depend upon how these things influence the completed landscape. Another thing is landscape is a link. Landscape is basically a link between the external environment and the built environment. So you have a building and you have a site, and how well you are melding both these together. That is also landscape design. Another thing is landscape and vegetation. They affect the total physical environment just as much as the building itself. And so therefore, since like when you're talking about building, you're examining all the aspects where energy can be reduced. Like you use a certain type of paint on the roof, which will reflect the solar radiation, and that might reduce the energy. Or you might design some specific type of shading devices. So the shading devices will cool the building. So similarly, landscaping also falls within this purview, because simple example is if you arrange 3 trees, suppose I have a west wall and I take 3 trees and I arrange them strategically. Suppose there's an instrument called helidion. Like I make a model and put it on the helidion, and then I take a photograph of the shadows. When I say I make the base with thermocol, I put the model, and then I can check the shadows at different times. Suppose the shadows at 11 o'clock, 11 to 4, how the shadows are falling on the building. So once I see these shadows and then I plant these trees strategically, say 3 trees only, then the effect of the cooling produced by these 3 trees is equal to an air conditioner working for 24 hours. So you can see the landscaping is a passive means of reducing energy. You're not using any active devices. Now, why is there so much of stress today on energy efficiency? That is because, after a long time now, man has realized that the Earth's resources are not limited, not unlimited, and the Earth cannot work like a huge waste paper basket. Earlier, all the waste used to be dumped, thinking that the Earth will swallow everything, and there's no dearth of energy, and resources are unlimited. But that has been proved to be wrong. And many of man's activities, for a simple example is the UK. In the UK, the British government sent a satellite called Nimbus into outer space, and from this Nimbus they took certain photographs beyond the ozone layer. And what this photograph showed was there are huge holes in the Antarctica and other places, and through those holes you have ultraviolet radiation falling on the Earth and causing harm. So nobody imagined that the solar ozone layer, which is thousands of kilometers away from the Earth, is so delicate, and it can be damaged by man who is living so far away. But all of you are aware how the ozone layer has been damaged. And this leads to a lot of growing awareness that one has to use products that are, that don't harm the environment. So one of the goals of sustainable architecture is, apart from reducing energy, you need to reduce the harm to the environment. So there is a growing concern among nations about deterioration of the environment quality, so due to various forms of pollution. So these pollution results from rapid urbanization, deterioration of scenic quality of recreational areas due to overuse, and unwise landscape development practices, and loss of biodiversity, damage to valuable wetlands, etc. So all these things point out to the need to design in a sensitive manner without causing damage to the ecosystems and the biodiversity and the total environment. So these concerns have given birth to a concept called green approach to landscaping. Now see here, all of you have studied about, in your second unit, you had history of gardens. And this is the example of a Zen garden in Kyoto, Japan. All of you are aware that Buddhism came to China via Korea and India. And earlier, Buddhism had idol worship, but later on, they adopted the Zen philosophy, where monks sit in a particular area and they look at the garden and then meditate. And the garden would contain minimalist elements like sand or rocks or shrubs. And one of the most famous gardens is called Ryonji, which is the most photographed garden in the world, where tourists, when they enter into this garden, Ryonji garden, this is in Kyoto, they are made to sit at a particular spot. Say, for example, here you have the flower pot. So here, suppose a person is sitting and he looks at the garden. From one particular point, they found that people are getting a very peaceful feeling. You get a very serene feeling. So this led to a lot of research. They were trying to find out why that feeling is coming only from one particular point. So then they started changing the station point, and they started rearranging the rocks in that garden. But then this feeling was not coming. So this Tokyo University Visual Arts Department, they carried out a lot of investigations, and this is published in a paper in Nature, where it was concluded that this is an act of design. It's not a conscious act of design. It is a subconscious act of design, where this particular garden was designed by the Buddhist monks while they were meditating. So while meditating, they went into a higher level of consciousness, and then this picture of this arrangement came. And here what happens is, as you can see, there are certain shrubs here. In that Ryonji, instead of shrubs, you have rocks. So the space between the rocks, when you look at that, so finally, if you draw a line connecting the space between the rocks, then a tree is formed, the picture of a tree in the mind. And when that is formed, the mind becomes very serene. So this was an extraordinary finding that, gardens can have a positive impact on the temperament of people. It can improve their temperament, and it can create feelings of sereneness. Okay, so then this is another example of a Japanese garden. So one of the major factors in Japanese gardens is that they used to take a small area, maybe like a microcosm, and you might have heard of bonsai gardens, where on a plate you can design a whole garden with miniature trees. So they used to take a small site, and then on that particular site, they used to do planting in such a way that it would look like a huge forest. For example, in this particular picture, you can see these are all trees, something like in a forest, and then you have a waterfall which has been very carefully designed. The stepping stones and all the stones have been very carefully placed so that it looks like a natural waterfall. And at the same time, what is surprising is just beyond these trees, there is a highway. So you cannot imagine there is a highway and it's busy, a lot of traffic is passing. So when you enter into this garden, you get a feeling that you're in a forest and you're cut off from all these highways and all those things. So these are some of the effects in some of the Japanese gardens. Then another thing that a landscape architect can do, which maybe an engineer might not be able to do these things, is create an artificial rainbow. All of you are aware about a rainbow. So here what happens, this is a small park in botanical garden in Australia, where, water is, shooting water hits a rock and then it gets splintered. And because of the sunlight, these droplets hit boulders, and these rocks are so carefully arranged that the drops splinter again to form a mist that attracts the sun coming through, and it forms a rainbow. So it's possible to create a rainbow. So this is something extraordinary which a landscape architect can do. Now there is, all of you must be aware that there is, you hear this word very often, there is a paradigm shift in landscaping thought. So I'll explain to you what is paradigm. See, earlier landscaping was viewed as a means of creating ornamental gardens, and mainly the visual quality of the landscapes was taken into consideration. When I studied landscape design, landscape architecture and BR, the syllabus did not have anything to do with energy efficiency in landscaping design. We were only taught history of landscape gardens and how to design gardens and all that. And basically, the visual quality was given a lot of emphasis, ornamental quality. But now today there's a paradigm shift. Paradigm, the meaning of paradigm is a pattern. See, for example, patterns are created in your mind about certain events, about certain people, and about certain things that you see in everyday life. For example, suppose you have a teacher who looks a bit, who appears to be very strict. So what happens is you may get the idea that this teacher is very strict, and then that idea might continue. You may pass on that idea to your juniors, and finally everyone in the college gets a feeling that this teacher is very strict, But then what happens? That paradigm might change once you get some fresh information or further information. I'll give you a small example. When I was doing BR, I was totally scared of my principal, Professor Shinde. He had a big mustache, and all the students are afraid of him. So even I, although I didn't have a chance to interact with him, I also had that idea that he's very strict. And that carried on for 5 years. After I finished my architecture also, I still carried that impression that he is a very, very strict person. Then one day I had opportunity to go for inspecting CEPT college through Council of Architecture. And Professor Shinde was the convener. So I was a bit afraid what I'll do. Then anyway, when I went there, I met him in the airport. And in the airport, we had a chance to talk for almost 1 hour because we had a gap in the flight timing. And then I found he's a very, very humorous person and a very kind person. And all my earlier ideas that he's a very sick person vanished. So what actually happened is there was a paradigm shift in the way I thought about him. So like that, you may have a paradigm shift about different events, about different people. And so once this shift occurs, then you change your idea. So earlier, the idea was landscaping is mainly ornamental and visual quality is important. But today, landscaping is viewed as a passive means of energy conservation, and plants and trees are selected on how well they can withstand drought and how well they can survive even in times of water crisis. So the present day energy shortage and water crisis demands a paradigm shift in landscaping thought. So today the concerns of the landscape architect, they go beyond just aesthetics, and you need to embrace energy conservation. So landscape is one of the most basic but neglected methods for conserving energy because it's a very cheap method. You don't have to spend a lot of money on energy conservation. Simple example is in one project, I did landscaping next to a boys' hostel, and planted a lot of trees. And we planted a lot of Azadrakta indica, that is neem trees. So what are the cost of the neem tree at that time? 5 rupees per tree. So overall, the cost was very negligible, but the effect given by the tree, it would shade the entire wall, whereas the shading device would shade only the windows. So and it is some of the trees are very cheap. So it's a passive means of reducing the energy. Then it's inexpensive, flexible. You can remove the tree if you don't want. And another thing is landscaping differs from other conservation strategies because it doesn't require any large initial cost. So suppose you are using solar panels, in the long run they're fine, but initially you have to spend a lot of money on investing in the solar panels. Then landscaping saves energy by reducing the demand for energy at the point of use, and application of energy efficient landscaping strategies would ultimately result in landscapes that would be self-sustaining and responsive to the present day scenario. What is the present day scenario? Energy saved is energy gained. So landscape elements, they are used as passive solar efficient architecture. In what ways? The plants in different forms. So you use trees, shrubs, creepers, hedges, ground cover. Then water bodies. Water bodies can be static and dynamic, natural and artificial. See, today, what do you mean by static and dynamic? You have a water body in front of Taj Mahal. So the water is not dynamic. So what happens? When do you use a static water body? When you want that building should be reflected in the water body in the front. So if you take a garden like Taj Mahal, or you take a Spanish garden like Alhambra, the pond in front of the garden, the entire Alhambra is reflected, and you get a very strange feeling when you see the building and also its reflection, in the water. Then dynamic water is like flowing water. All of you have seen one of the best examples is Frank Lloyd Wright's falling water. Falling water changes according to the seasons. In summer, the water is flowing. In winter, it freezes and it becomes ice. Then natural and artificial. Natural is like something that is flowing by itself. Artificial is you create that particular effect. Today, for example, if you take apartments in Dubai, someone staying in the, let us say, 60th floor, he also wants to see a waterfall, not waterfall, fountain. By sitting in the balcony, he wants to see a fountain. So what do? So a normal fountain will not go to that height. So you use some gas for pushing that water up, and then that guy sees this waterfall. So that's an artificial way of, using these fountains and all that. Then again, for example, in Dubai, another example is like if you're traveling in Dubai on the roads, by the side of the roads, you'll find a lot of ground cover, petunia flowers with different colors. And these are all maintained by the municipal corporation. And they keep changing the colors according to the requirement of the drivers. Like when you're driving in the highway, you don't want to be diverted, then they use one color. So different colors are used to create different effects. And, okay. So then you have something called ground forms. So ground forms are earth forms where you use mounds and trenches, and these are also part of landscaping. Then you use paving materials. Paving materials come under one heading called hardscape elements. You have two types. One is called softscape elements, one is called hardscape elements. So elements that have life, like plants and all these things, are softscape elements. Even water is softscape. Then sharp, hard materials, like in a Japanese garden, for example, the rocks are all hardscape elements. And, like you may have street furniture, lamps, and all these are basically utilities. These are all hardscape elements. Then you use barriers. Barriers, for example, there's something called bollards. So these bollards will prevent traffic from going into areas where they are not allowed to go. So they are placed in next to buildings on roads. Now see here, what is this building and where is it? You can see this building, those who are in Hyderabad, because this is a picture of a building in Hyderabad on, I think, road number, I'm not sure, maybe 11 or 12, Banjara Hills. I took this photograph when I was going to the college in the bus. So here, what is the reason for showing this photograph? You can see on top of the building, they have used Celoviana ground cover, which has violet color flowers. And just so that they are purchased from nursery. Now, just adjacent to that site, you have this lantana camera, which is growing wild. And this lantana, which is growing wild, is much more hardy than the delicate Celoviana, because this one grows wild. So what I was trying to show is he could have simply taken a cutting of this and used it there. So preservation and use of flora, which are indigenous, is always better. Because what is the reason for using indigenous vegetation? one of the reasons for using indigenous or native, which are native to that particular place, which are growing there from long time, is that they're able to withstand the impact of that particular climate of that area better than exotic. Exotic means foreign varieties. So it's always better to use, as far as possible, indigenous varieties. But again, there is another school of thought, because what happens is, in among all the trees that we are using in landscaping today, I can tell you that 80%, 80% or even more of the trees that we use in landscaping are exotic varieties. They are not indigenous varieties. Indigenous varieties are very few, like you have neem trees, Azathrakta indica. Whenever you use indigenous variety, that tag indica will be there. Azathrakta indica or Mangifera indica or Tamarindus indica. But these are quite few, and most of the others are exotic. Now, why are you using this as your exotic varieties? So, for example, suppose I use a tree like Callistemon lanceolate because it has very attractive flowers, it's also called bottle brush. The thing is, these trees are native to a particular climate, like in Australia, native of Australia, and that climate is somewhat similar to our climate. So they have come to India, they have adopted very well, and they're growing very well. They have more or less become like indigenous varieties. So a simple example, nobody doubt that Gulmohar is not an Indian tree. Gulmohar is from Brazil, but it is planted here and it has adopted very well. So the argument that you have to use only indigenous variety has to be taken with a pinch of salt, because there are a lot of exotic varieties which have adopted very well. Say it's somewhat similar to saying that people are citizens of Telangana or Andhra Pradesh. They're native to Telangana, native to Andhra Pradesh. But then if you go to America, they're native to what? The citizens of America are from all over the world. There is nobody saying a French person cannot live in America. Nobody says there is a Indians are there, and it is a mixture of melting pot of all cultures all over the world, and they are all doing very well. So trying to divide the vegetation based on boundaries is not really very correct. Okay. Now, there is something called drought and pollution resistant plants. See, this is a campus in near Nagpur, 50 kilometers from Nagpur, called Kids Ramtek. So they use a lot of cacti and succulents which are drought resistant. And on the right side, you can see this is a Thuja orientalis. So this is called Chinese Thuja. So this species, you see the leaves are very tightly packed together. So in industrial areas, they use these plants because they can absorb pollution. So one angle is plants that are pollution resistant, plants that are sulfur dioxide resistant. In industrial areas, you need to use these type of plants. And another aspect is plants that are dust resistant. So in parks especially, a lot of studies have been done where if you plant some trees which absorb dust, they can purify the air. Now another paradigm shift is like the type of plants which form the palette of a landscape architect. Today you have all these drought-resistant plants. Say, for example, on the left you have this Ajay trees. This is in a park in Nagpur called Ambazari Park. And then you have something called elephant's foot. So all this the Bucharnia. So these are all being used extensively today because of their ability to survive in drought-like conditions. Then there's something called embellishment. Now, what is the meaning of embellishment? Embellishment need not be a tree. It could be a tree, but mainly it's like sculptures or statues and things like that, which are added in the landscape to add interest. See, for example, when you're having a meal, it's not compulsory to eat ice cream. But what happens if you eat ice cream? You feel happy. So, like that, if embellishment, say, for example, this is a sculpture that I designed and we planted it next to the building. So, it's very cheap and it is made from recycled material. So, these are known as embellishments. So, now we come to this part. This is important. What are the functional and okay, there is some disturbance from outside. but I told you macro climate can't be controlled. If it's inside my house, I can stop it. Outside, I can't. Anyway, functional and visual role of trees. Basically, trees are basically planted so that they provide a shade. Then you can they provide privacy. They can enclose space, and there are some trees we just like to look at those trees because they're very ornamental. Then functional role, trees can obstruct the wind. Say, for example, you use shelter belts. So the shelter belts can block strong winds before they come to land. For example, in Vizag, you can use a lot of shelter belts along the beach. Then, like trees can be used to filter the wind through. So what happens when wind passes through the foliage of the trees, the dust particles might be intercepted. Then trees can even channel the wind. How you arrange the trees. For example, there's something called Venturi effect. So Venturi effect is used to increase the wind speed. Say suppose the wind speed outside your building is around less than 1.5 meters per second. It means it's more or less stationary. You want to increase the speed, then you use something called Venturi effect, where the planting, like you narrow down the planting as you go ahead. Then again, plants can deflect the wind. So it's not just trees, but also shrubs which can deflect the wind. So how far you plant the trees and shrubs from the building, that can dictate whether the wind will be directed into the building or above the building. Then trees can be used as a focal point. What type of trees can you use as a focal point? Some tree which is very peculiar, whose character is different from the surrounding trees. Same thing for buildings also. Simple example is all of you are aware of Sydney, the town of Sydney. So what happens when someone tells Sydney? What is the first thing that comes to your mind? So you think of Sydney Opera House. Now, Sydney Opera House is not the only building in Sydney. There are thousands of buildings, but you never think of any other building except Sydney Opera House. Why? Because its form is totally different from all the other buildings in that particular area, and it has attracted a lot of attention. And whenever you talk of that city, you talk of Sydney Opera House. So, like that, this tree can be a very large type of tree, or it can be a peculiar type of tree, some characteristic which is different from the other plants. Then it can be used as a focal point. Then trees can be used to frame a building. Like when you plant them next to the building, they would be framing it. Then another thing is it can be used to focus attention onto a particular area, just like you have in buildings like Taj Mahal and others, where you have rows of trees which are planted on either side of the axis, and they direct attention towards something known as the terminus. Terminus is the point where the movement ends, and there you have the Taj Mahal or a particular building. Now, apart from this, plants have an ecological role. So what do you mean by ecological role? Ecology talks about interrelationships of plants and the symbiotic relationship of plants and other organisms. So there are many organisms which depend on the plant. And if you remove that plant from that area, then or tree from that area, then many of these organisms will get affected. This is a picture of a huge tree, banyan tree in this Indira Gandhi Zoological Park in Visakhapatnam. It's next to our university. So here you can see the diameter of the tree. It's a huge tree, and it's basically a deer park. So you can see here a lot of deer. They come and take under the shade of this tree. Then again, you will find on top of the tree a lot of animals will be there, like monkeys, etc. Then along the trunk there would be certain squirrels and all those type of animals. Then below the ground you'll find caterpillars. So this whole thing forms an ecosystem. And if I remove this tree, that entire, and another thing, such a large tree, it will alter the microclimate of this area because it is casting shade on the ground. So once it grows shade on the ground, a simple question is, suppose this area is shaded. Now, what type of plants will grow there? So plants which grow in the shade are known as shade-loving plants. plants which grow in sun are known as sun-loving plants. So the type of vegetation on one side where there is shade, the other side there is no shade will again be different. Some will be sun-loving, some will be shade-loving. So the ecological role is very important, and a symbiotic relationship between trees and other organisms are very important in terms of the biodiversity. There are many trees which are becoming extinct. So these are all documented and they need to be preserved. And there are lots of trees which have medicinal properties. So, for example, a plant called penicillin. So, that was preserved, and that's how you got penicillin. Suppose it had become extinct, you wouldn't have penicillin. So, like that, a lot of medicinal properties of plants are also important. Then these are the typical forms of trees and shrubs. Now, what gives rise to the forms of trees? Basically, it is the branching structure. So if the branching structure is vertical, then you will get something like Ashoka tree. If the branching structure is horizontal, then you will get something like Terminalia catapa or Badam tree. Then see, simple example here. This branching structure is like a V shape. So what is this tree? This is called vase shape. And this is an example of a tree that is the orange tree. In Nagpur, you have a lot of orange trees, and the structure of the tree, because the branches are going in a V shape, so that gives rise to the shape. And another thing where the branches are drooping, so you get something called weeping shape. So these are all different forms of trees, and even shrubs you have the same forms repeating. Now I'll give you some examples of these forms. For example, like here you have seen this weeping shape. This type of shape of tree grows very well. It looks very well next to a water body. So here you can see this is Callistemon lanceolatus, and this is also known as bottle brush. So the flower will be like a bottle brush, and the shape is basically a weeping shape. Now this is Ficus elastica tree. So you can see the shape. It is basically a round shape. This is actually, this was my room in this campus in this college. And morning when I opened the window, I used to find a monkey sitting here because there are a lot of monkeys in that campus. So then I used to say good morning, and the monkey used to nod his head. And okay, so a lot of this is a particular round shape. It's Ficus elastica. Okay, one more thing. Since we are in this topic, let me just tell you how you write the name of a tree, the botanical name. This is very important because a lot of people make that mistake. You talk about something called ficus. What is ficus? Ficus is the genus, or say surname is the species. So it's somewhat similar to, best example I can give is you have Pandavas. So Pandava is the species, and the genus, and species are say Pandava, Bhim, Pandava, Arjun. Five species are there in the Pandavas. And why they are grouped as Pandavas? It is believed that these Pandavas were having good qualities. They were virtuous people. And then you had, on the other hand, the Kauravas. So Kaurava, Duryodhan, Kaurava, so and so, Dushyasan, that. So Kaurava is the genus, and Duryodhan is the species. So what is the common quality they all shared? All these Kauravas were nasty people. They specialized in pulling ladies' saris and those type of things, and they were basically not having good qualities. So this is how you write the species. Remember, the genus is written with a capital letter, and the species is written with a small letter. Suppose you write Ficus elastica E with a capital letter, it is the wrong way of describing the tree. This is the botanical nomenclature that is used. Now here again, plants are used for their fragrance, so they can, give good scent in the air. For example, this is a Plumeria alba tree, and it's also known as a pagoda tree, and it is also called amaltas. So it has got what do you say? The flowers of this particular tree are used for making perfume, and they're bottled and sold in Paris. So in this again there are two varieties. One is with the white flowers, and the leaf is obtuse, so it is called Plumeria obtusa. The one with pointed leaves is called Plumeria rubra, and it has red color flowers. And the difference is these red color flowers don't open completely; they are partially opened. So these are plants which are used for their fragrance. Then, for example, this is a tree. All these are from that Kids Ramtech campus. So this is a tree which is known as Butia monosperma. It's also called flame of the forest or palash. So you might be aware of this tree. Like before Holi, the flowers are used for making the water of the pitchkari, and the flower is attractive, the tree is attractive, but only problem is what you can see if you observe it from close quarters is that the trunk of the tree has lots of thorns, and that makes the trunk not very attractive. If you are happy with the trunk, it's fine, but one major feature of this tree is that its roots hold the soil together, and they act as a soil binder. For example, in Kids Ramtech, the soil is black cotton soil. So this tree would be a very, very effective tree in holding the soil together. Okay, so these are trees that are ornamental. You just like to look at those trees. So left side is a tree from a campus in Pune. It is Cassia fistula. Sorry, Cassia fistula is Amaltus, not Plumeria. Plumeria is some other name, I forgot. So Cassia fistula is, it has, it's not very particular about the type of climate. It can grow in a hot and dry or hot and humid climate. And it has flowers which hang like beads on the branches. And when it is in full bloom, it's very attractive. The right hand side, you have this tree called Pride of India. This is Lagerstromia flos and this is also, the flower is very attractive. You get pink flowers, white flowers, red flowers, and the flower is known as queen's flower. So it's a medium-sized tree and quite attractive. See, this is when you use Lagerstromia in row. This is a garden in Australia. So it looks very attractive, and you put them on either side of the path. So you can use these plants for providing passive cooling in landscaping by careful positioning of the trees, and also depending on the height of the shrub, at what distance you have to place it. Those things can be studied. And up to 7 degrees reduction in temperature can be obtained by planting creepers next to a building skin. See, when you put creepers next to a building wall, sometimes that wall is also known as a living wall. So what happens is that creeper is growing along the wall. There may be an air gap. You put a trellis and the creeper grows on that. So the creeper will reduce to some extent the heat that gets transferred from outside into the building. So studies have been done. We have actually done some calculations. We used the thermal imaging camera and recorded how much reduction in the heat is obtained by planting this particular creeper called Pyrostogia regia next to the wall in architecture college. And around 4 or 5 degrees Celsius difference was observed. Like you take the temperature on the bare wall and then you take the temperature on the wall where the creeper is. So approximately you get the difference. So definitely the creepers can reduce the effect of thermal transfer of heat. There's one example from Hyderabad also, I'll show you that. Then another thing is vegetation darker in color and coarser in texture can absorb more radiation from the sun and can reduce solar influx to a building in its vicinity. Now here, what is the important conclusion? When you're using dark colored vegetation, then all of you know dark colors will absorb the heat. Now, where can you take this inference and use it? For example, if you're having a terrace garden, and you put a green roof, then the type of vegetation which you're planting on the green roof, if you're using light colors, then like if you say use Ipomia chatarus or something like that, which is light green color, that will reflect the heat. Or you have some white color plants also, like Artemisia, Dusty, Miller, and things like that. So they will reflect off the heat. But if the foliage is dark in color, then they will absorb the heat and radiate it into the building. So choice of the color also plays an important role when you're talking about energy conservation. Now see, this is a ficus tree, and it's a, you can see the shape, it's a evergreen tree with a round foliage, and it provides good shade. They use this particular tree in five-star hotels, and this size tree will cost around 20,000 or so. This is in Kids Ramte. This is another tree called Devil's Tree. This is called Elstonia scholaris. You can see this. There is one avenue in IIT Kharagpur. It's called Elstonia scholaris Avenue, where on either side you have these Elstonia trees. And the tribals believe that the devil stays on top of the tree. So it's called Devil's Tree or Shaitan. And because of that, this tree is preserved, and it has not become extinct. Otherwise, it's a good alternative. They make slates and all that from this wood of this particular tree. So this particular tree, when planted in clumps, it grows very fast. Like unlike other trees, it grows fast. It has good foliage, and it has a nice trunk, and it has 5 leaves which radiate from a center point. This I already showed you. This is Legerstomia. Then again, I think Sunil will remember this. These are actually trees in the Andhra University campus. So when I was teaching in Andhra University, we did a study of the trees. This is in the South campus. And they have, say, Andhra University has, in Visakhapatnam, has a lot of collection of very natural growing rich trees. Especially, they have massive eucalyptus trees. Sometimes they're dangerous. In the time of cyclone, many of them fell on the buildings. But then here you can see there's an India left side you have a silk cotton tree, then Swetania mahogonia. So this mahogonia tree we have planted. I mean, university authorities have planted in GITAM campus in Vizag. But that character is different from this one. This one actually it spreads a lot, whereas that particular mahogany tree goes straight up. So you have different varieties in that same species. So these are shade trees. Then you can see how shade is used in a campus in Australia, where there's a bench below the shade, and students use these for as an outdoor class. They'll be studying there. Then again, when you talk about plant materials and microclimate, like you can see on the top sketch, the plants, the foliage of the plants, they'll be sweating, and they'll be giving out moisture to the environment. So what is that process called? It's called evapotranspiration. And because of that, you get something known as evaporative cooling. Then trees can, you can see that trees can divert the airflow, and then they can induce airflow evaporatively. Suppose you have foliage only on the top, then from below the air can move in. Then they cast a shade. Then the leaves will fall, and the litter will create something called humus. See, for humus is like fertilizer. You have a particular tree like Pongamia glabra. So those leaves of that tree, they form a lot of manure. Then trees are used in shelter belts, and they can reduce noise. For example, coniferous trees, where the foliage starts from the ground, they will be able to block winds much better, or even sound much better. Now here in this, you can see, like if you plant trees at certain distance from the building, early morning sun, for example, it is at a low angle, let's say 45 or 50 degrees. So there, the sunshade will not be effective, because you cannot block that early morning sun. Early morning, you don't need to block the sun, eastern sun, but then what you need to block is the western sun. So what happens is the tree, if it is located here at this height, then it can block the early morning sun. Then if you put it at this height, then it will block the sun at maybe 11 o'clock or 10:30 or something. If you put it here, then it will block the sun at 12 o'clock. So if you want, if you know the distance at which the tree has to be planted, and you give us the distance, then we can tell you what should be the height of the tree. So there was one program designed by one architecture student where he made a list of all the trees, and you specify, I'm going to plant this tree at this much distance from the building, then he will tell you use this tree, because the mature growth of that tree will be of that particular height. So it's quite a good program where it can be used. Okay, you'll read this. There are certain things like how to maximize winter shading. See, you need to summer shading, you need to maximize, and you have to minimize winter shading. So what type of trees are suitable for this? Deciduous trees, because they shed their leaves in winter, which will allow the sun through the branches, and in summer they block the sun. So the form type, there's something called bare branch density. So without leaves, what is the density? Then trees with tall mature height, so where they should be planted, and on the south side you need to plant tall trees. So all these are certain guidelines. I won't go into detail. So you can see, like, if you plant it at this distance, how the shadows are forming. See, this is a very good example in history from a settlement called Taos Pueblo. There's Tacoma Pueblo and Taos Pueblo, which is a settlement in New Mexico, which was designed completely with mud. So the buildings were built in terraces, and the streets, they were located along the streets in such a way that in winter the sun would fall on all the terraces. So you can see that very careful planning for allowing solar radiation into the buildings was done by our forefathers much before we heard of the term landscaping. Okay, these are certain research findings. Maybe we can skip these, but I'll just briefly tell you. Parker, he has done some studies in Miami, Florida. So on hot sunny days, how the heat can be reduced, how climbing vines, he showed 10 to 12 degrees reduction in heat. Then again, when you're planting next to the building skin, so I told you, depending on the leaf, it may reflect the heat, it may let the heat inside. So many times you plant certain things like English ivy and creepers. So they have to be carefully planted so that they don't damage the wall actually. Okay, this Hoyano in Japan, he performed a lot of experiments, and many of these experiments are based on IVs, which are climbing on the wall, and they calculated how much reduction in temperature is obtained. See, this is a building I told you about. There's a building in Hyderabad. Now, I took this picture from outside the building. Now, the problem in many of these buildings where landscaping is done, even the landscape architect, if he has designed the building, after the building is completed and all, many times the clients will not allow him into the building. They say they want privacy, and then if he says, I want to see the thing, very few times they'll allow. So here, but anyway, what I'm trying to show you is they have used this creeper. This is in Banjara Hills, next to that Nagethrau's house. So they put a creeper here. So this creeper will reduce the thermal transfer of heat, and they have used the creeper on the compound walls. So what is the purpose of using the creeper on the compound wall? The compound wall will reduce reflected heat. See, suppose this is just a wall, then the heat gets reflected from the wall, it hits the ground, then again it gets reflected into the building. So here it will absorb the heat and it will prevent reflected heat. Now, these are some buildings in Ambazari Park where the buildings, they are clad with things. And this is a hedging plant. This is also effective. Now, this is one building in Vizag near Pandurangapuram. So the client wanted some, lawn where he could conduct parties, and he didn't want a wall. He felt wall will be very restrictive. So instead of wall, a trellis was used. So we put this creeper on that, and this particular in Vizag climate, it's a humid climate, so you get air movement through the voids, and when this creeper is flowering, then it looks attractive when you're sitting here. This is Ambadari Park. This is the creeper when it's not flowering, and this is when it's flowering. So when this Pyrostrogia venesta flowers, then it's very attractive. Sunil, hello.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. 1 second. He's coming.
How much time is elapsed? Can you tell?
It is 10:55, sir.
You want to take a break?
Yes, sir. We can take a break.
Because you can give them 15 minutes break.
Okay, sir.
Is it okay?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. We'll give a 15 minutes break. No problem.
Okay, then I'll join you after 15 minutes.
Okay, sir. Okay, you all can join back at 11:10 again. 15 minutes break. All right.